The words landed in the quiet room like dropped lead. Not shouted, not whispered, just stated. A simple observation delivered with the precision of a surgeon's cut, or maybe just the blunt force of a hammer. My mother, seated at the head of the long Easter brunch table, looked out at the assembled faces, cousins in their crisp shirts discussing stock portfolios, aunts beaming about their children's latest academic accolades, uncles swapping stories of closing deals, and her gaze, heavy and familiar, settled on me. The late afternoon sun, golden and thick with the scent of lilies and roasted ham, streamed through the dining room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious to the sudden stillness that gripped the room. The clinking of forks against ceramic stopped. The low hum of conversation died. Every eye seemed to pivot, drawn by some invisible thread to the object of her focus.
Me.
And she said it, just like that. Casual, almost regretful, as if stating a universally acknowledged truth she wished wasn't so. "Everyone here," she began, her voice carrying just enough to cut through the awkward pause, a voice I knew better than my own, a voice that could soothe or slice with equal ease. "Everyone has really accomplished something significant this past year. A promotion, a new house, starting a family. Something tangible, something real." She paused, letting the weight of something real settle. Then, the gaze intensified, and the final clause, the one meant only for me, yet broadcast to the silent room, landed. Except her. My name wasn't necessary. In that moment, surrounded by the heavy silver and the delicate porcelain, beneath the benign gaze of a painted portrait of a long-dead ancestor, her could only be me. The air felt suddenly thin. My lungs wouldn't expand. The perfectly arranged plate of deviled eggs in front of me blurred. I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks, a slow, humiliating burn that had nothing to do with the warmth of the sun. The scent of lilies suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole, plate of eggs and all. I wanted to disappear into the dancing dust motes. I wanted to be anywhere but here, trapped in the spotlight of my mother's disappointment, amplified by the silent witness of my entire family. It wasn't just a comment. It was a public pronouncement of my perceived failure, delivered on a day meant for celebration and renewal. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before that Easter, life felt quieter. Not necessarily easier, but the battles were internal, fought in the hushed hours between midnight and dawn. I was living in a small apartment that smelled faintly of old paper and too much coffee. My job was a patchwork of freelance gigs that paid the bills just barely. My passion, the thing that consumed my thoughts and my energy, was writing. Not just writing emails or articles, but writing the story. The one that had been churning inside me for years, a complex tapestry of characters and plot, a world I escaped into when the real one felt too loud or too small. In my family, accomplishment wore a uniform, tailored suits, corner offices, medical scrubs, law degrees. My cousins were lawyers, doctors, engineers, investment bankers. They built things you could see, touched lives in ways the world recognized and rewarded with six-figure salaries and impressive titles. They were the pillars of society, the pride of the family tree. I was the creative one. The one who liked to write. It sounded like a cute hobby, like knitting or collecting stamps, not a serious pursuit, not a career path worthy of discussion at the dinner table, certainly not at Easter brunch. Growing up, I'd always felt the subtle pressure. The gentle nudges towards something more stable, more practical. "You're so smart," my mother would say, holding my report card with a frown that contradicted the words. "Why don't you put that brain towards something useful? Like your cousin Mark, he's going to medical school," or "Your stories are lovely, dear, very imaginative, but have you thought about business school? It's much more reliable." The messages were consistent, delivered with a smile, but they chipped away at the foundation of my self-belief, leaving cracks that widened with every comparison. I loved my family. Fiercely. They weren't malicious, not truly. They operated within a framework they understood, a world where success was measured by specific, quantifiable metrics. My world, the world of words, of imagined lives, of subjective impact, was alien to them. And what you don't understand, you often dismiss. So, I learned to keep my writing to myself. It was my secret garden, a place I retreated to, protecting it from the well-meaning, yet ultimately hurtful, assessments of the outside world, especially my family's world. But keeping it secret also meant it wasn't acknowledged. It wasn't seen as work. It was just something I did. While my cousins announced promotions and mergers, I had nothing to announce, at least not in their language. I was writing a novel, pouring my heart and soul into it, working longer hours than any office job, but it had no title yet, no publisher, no release date, no guaranteed paycheck. In their eyes, it was nothing. Easter brunch. It was always the biggest family gathering of the year. The matriarch's decree. Everyone was expected. Everyone was observed. You came, you smiled, you ate too much, and you presented the best version of yourself, usually framed by recent achievements. This year, the air felt particularly charged. My cousin Sarah had just made partner at her law firm. My cousin David had just closed a major real estate deal. The conversations buzzed with numbers, with titles, with tangible markers of success. I sat there, smiling, contributing to the small talk about the weather and the excellent ham, feeling the familiar knot in my stomach tighten. I knew this part was coming, the inevitable round-robin of accomplishments. I usually managed to deflect, to make a self-deprecating joke about my glamorous freelance life, to shrink myself just small enough to fit into the background. But this year was different. Maybe Mom was feeling extra pressure from her sisters, whose children were all soaring. Maybe she was genuinely worried about me, in her own, terribly misguided way. Whatever the reason, she chose that moment, the peak of the familial performance, to put me on display not for my achievements, but for my perceived lack thereof. The words hung in the air. Accept her. It wasn't just the words. It was the context, the public setting, the timing. It stripped away my defenses, my quiet dignity. It felt like being naked in front of a crowd, exposed and found wanting. My face burned. My hands trembled slightly where they rested in my lap. I couldn't look at anyone. I focused on the intricate pattern of the lace tablecloth, counting the tiny stitches, trying to find solid ground in the swirling humiliation. Someone, I think it was my Aunt Carol, mercifully jumped in, changing the subject, asking about someone's garden. The moment passed. Outwardly. The conversation picked up again, a little more forced now, a little more strained. But the words lingered in the air like the heavy perfume of the lilies. They had landed, and they had landed hard. The rest of the brunch was a blur of forced smiles and masticated ham I couldn't taste. Every laugh felt hollow. Every exchange, superficial. I felt like a ghost at the feast, present but invisible, or worse, visible only as a symbol of failure. I couldn't shake the feeling of being fundamentally flawed, of being the one outlier in a family of high achievers, the one who hadn't measured up. When I finally made my escape, mumbling something about needing to leave early, the relief was so potent it was almost painful. I got in my car, the silence a stark contrast to the forced gaiety I'd left behind. I drove aimlessly for a while, the setting sun painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, colors that mirrored the ache in my chest. The shame was a physical weight. It pressed down on my shoulders, making it hard to sit up straight. It tightened my throat, making it hard to swallow. Those words, accept her, they echoed in the hollow space where my confidence used to be. They confirmed my deepest fears, the ones I fought every day in the quiet solitude of my apartment. What if they were right? What if I was wasting my time? What if I wasn't capable of real accomplishment? I went back to my apartment, the air inside stale and lonely after the warmth, however strained, of the family home. I looked at my laptop, the blinking cursor on the screen mocking me. The manuscript. My novel. The thing I poured my soul into. In the harsh light of Mom's judgment, it suddenly felt silly, insignificant. Just words on a screen. A hobby. Sitting there, staring at the screen, the words felt heavy, meaningless. The vibrant characters I'd created seemed to mock me. The intricate plot felt flimsy, breakable. Doubt, a venomous serpent, began to coil in my gut. Had I been delusional? Had I mistaken passion for talent? Had I sacrificed stability and security for a pipe dream that my own mother, the person who was supposed to believe in me unconditionally, saw as nothing? The struggle was immediate and debilitating. For days, I couldn't write. I'd sit at my desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and Mom's voice would echo in my head, a relentless loop of, accept her. The shame was a paralyzing fog. It seeped into everything. Eating felt pointless. Sleeping was a battlefield of anxious thoughts. The world outside my apartment felt distant and irrelevant. All that mattered was the gaping chasm between who I was and who my family, especially my mother, thought I should be. The freelance work suffered. Deadlines loomed and passed. I couldn't concentrate. The words on the page were flat, lifeless. I felt like a fraud in every aspect of my life. How could I write stories for others when my own story felt so irrevocably broken? Every phone call from a family member felt like an interrogation. So, still writing? The casual tone couldn't hide the underlying question. Still playing around instead of doing something serious? My well-meaning aunt asked if I'd thought about getting a certificate in medical coding. It's very in demand, dear, stable. My uncle sent me links to job postings for administrative assistants. Each suggestion, each question, was a tiny pebble dropped into the pond of my self-doubt, sending ripples that threatened to drown me. The rejections started arriving around this time. They weren't new. I'd sent out queries to agents months ago, clinging to a fragile hope. But now, each thin envelope, each impersonal email felt like a personal confirmation of Mom's words. Thank you for submitting, but this project does not meet our current needs. Translated. You are not good enough. Your story is not worthy. You are, indeed, the one exception. I tacked them to a corkboard in my makeshift office. Not out of hope or determination, but out of a perverse need to witness the mounting evidence of my failure. They fluttered like dead leaves, a testament to a barren season. The financial pressure became acute. The freelance income dried up. I started dipping into my meager savings, the ones I'd set aside for rent and food, money I had hoped to use for editing or submission fees. Now it was just for survival. The fear became constant, a low-grade hum beneath the surface of my life. Fear of running out of money. Fear of having to ask my parents for help and facing their disappointed sighs. Fear of never finishing the book. Fear of finishing it and having it fail anyway. Fear that Mom was right, that I was simply incapable of achieving anything that mattered in the world, anything real. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage. The blank screen of my laptop, once an invitation, felt like a judgment. The stacks of books around me, sources of inspiration, now felt like reminders of what I wasn't. I was trapped in a cycle of self-recrimination and despair, the walls closing in. The lowest point came on a Tuesday. Or maybe a Wednesday. The days blurred. I'd just received another rejection, one that felt particularly dismissive. The fridge was nearly empty. I had less than $100 in my bank account. I called my dad, intending to ask for a small loan, swallowed my pride, rehearsed the casual tone, but when he answered, he sounded tired. He mentioned something about my cousin Mark's impending residency, and the words caught in my throat. I couldn't ask. I couldn't admit how bad things were, how much I had failed, how right Mom had been. I mumbled something about just calling to say hi and hung up, the receiver feeling heavy and cold in my hand. I sat on the floor in my living room, the afternoon sun now cold and weak. I looked at the corkboard covered in rejections. I looked at the laptop, dark and silent. The words came back, loud and clear, as if Mom were sitting right beside me. Everyone has accomplished something, except her. A sob clawed its way up my throat, a ragged, painful sound. Then another. And another. I curled into a ball on the floor, clutching my knees, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just the rejections or the money, or even Mom's words anymore. It was the accumulation of years of feeling less than, of feeling misunderstood, of fighting a silent battle that no one in my family seemed to acknowledge, let alone appreciate. I cried until my eyes were dry and scratchy, until my body ached from tension, until there were no more tears left. I lay there for a long time, the silence of the apartment pressing in. The initial storm of grief subsided, leaving behind a hollow, empty calm. And in that emptiness, something shifted. Slowly, quietly, like the tide turning far out at sea. The self-pity began to recede, replaced by something colder, harder. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but a cold, steady burn, like embers that refuse to die. Anger at the rejections. Anger at the financial strain. Anger at the feeling of isolation. And most of all, anger at Mom. Not just for the words she spoke, but for the years of subtle undermining, the constant comparisons, the inability to see me for who I was, to value what I valued. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, a thought surfaced, sharp and clear. They see me as a failure. They measure accomplishment in their terms. What if I stopped trying to fit into their box? What if I built my own box? A bigger one. The anger fueled a new kind of resolve. The shame didn't disappear, but it was transformed. It became fuel. That feeling of being singled out, of being labeled the exception, it became the very thing that would drive me. Proving them wrong felt less important than proving myself right. But how to do that in a way they would understand? How to make an accomplishment they couldn't dismiss, couldn't minimize? They valued visibility. They valued numbers. They valued public recognition. A quiet life of writing, however fulfilling, would never register on their scale. I needed something undeniable. Something loud. Something they couldn't ignore. Slowly, painfully, I got up. My body felt stiff and heavy, but the fog in my mind had begun to clear. I looked at the corkboard of rejections again. This time, I didn't see failure. I saw obstacles. I saw the path not to take. The traditional publishing world, the one that operated on subjective taste and gatekeepers, felt like a dead end for the kind of undeniable success I now craved. A different path began to form in my mind, one I had previously dismissed as less prestigious, less real self-publishing. The digital world, a place where readers, not gatekeepers, decided what was worthy. It was harder, they said, required more hustle, more business sense, but it also offered control. And, crucially, it offered the potential for a different kind of success, one measured not just in critical acclaim, but in readership, in sales, in direct connection with people who wanted to read my story. The idea solidified. I wouldn't just write the book. I would build a platform. I would learn marketing. I would treat it like a business. I would make it undeniable not just to myself, but to the world, including my family. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, almost terrifying determination. Mom's words hadn't broken me. They had forged me into something harder, sharper. This wasn't just about writing a story anymore. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about turning their dismissal into my greatest strength. It was about building an accomplishment so visible, so undeniable, that it would shatter their limited definition of success and force them to see me, truly see me, for the first time. The period that followed was a relentless grind. The cold determination born from despair became my constant companion. It didn't make things easy. It just made them possible. I cut expenses to the bone. Instant noodles became a staple. Going out was a forgotten luxury. Every spare moment, every ounce of energy, was poured into the book and the nascent plan to launch it into the world. I revised the manuscript with a ferocity I hadn't known I possessed. Every word was scrutinized, every sentence polished. The story itself felt different now, infused with a new urgency, a new depth that reflected my own struggle. I wasn't just telling a story. I was weaving my defiance into every page. Finding a good editor was a challenge on a shoestring budget, but I researched relentlessly, comparing prices, reading reviews, finally settling on someone who believed in the story and was willing to work within my tight constraints. Paying her felt like a massive gamble, draining a significant chunk of my remaining savings, but it was a non-negotiable step in making the book as professional as possible. Then came the marketing. I knew nothing about it. I spent hours online, devouring articles, watching tutorials, learning about cover design, book blurbs, online advertising, building an author platform, connecting with readers. It felt overwhelming, a second full-time job on top of finishing the book. The traditional image of a writer, solitary, removed, was shattered. This required hustle, business savvy, a willingness to put myself out there in ways that terrified the introverted part of me. Family interactions during this time were minimal and strained. I avoided calls, offered brief, non-committal answers when I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to talk about what I was doing. Not only because I was afraid it would fail, but because the cold core of my motivation was tied to their dismissal, and I wasn't ready to expose that. They still assumed I was drifting, still waiting for me to land that real job. Their continued lack of expectation, their continued subtle and not so subtle pity, only solidified my resolve. Let them think I was failing. Let them keep the bar low. It would only make the eventual impact greater. Money was a constant source of anxiety. There were weeks I genuinely worried about making rent. I took on extra freelance work, soul-crushing tasks that paid just enough to keep the lights on, stealing time and energy from the book. But I pushed through. The image of my mother's face, framed by the Easter lilies, saying, "Accept her," was a powerful, if painful, motivator. The process was isolating. I withdrew from friends, unable to explain the all-consuming nature of my project or the depth of the emotional wound driving it. It was just me, the laptop, the mounting pile of expenses, and the quiet, relentless hum of determination. There were moments, countless moments, when the fear would surge, threatening to overwhelm me, when I'd stare at the glowing screen and think, "This is insane. You're going broke for this. You're going to fail. And then what?" But I always came back to the feeling on the floor that Tuesday/Wednesday. The cold anger, the decision to fight, the belief, however small, that my story mattered, that I mattered, even if my family didn't see it yet. This wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore. It was about reclaiming my own sense of worth, independent of their validation. But the desire for that external moment of vindication, the moment when they would be forced to see, remained a powerful undercurrent, a secret fire that kept me going through the darkest nights. The book was finished, edited, formatted. The cover design was perfect, striking, and professional. I uploaded it to the online platforms. It felt anticlimactic and terrifying all at once. It was out there, available to anyone, available theoretically to my family, though I knew they wouldn't seek it out. Why would they? It was just my little story. The launch was quiet. A few social media posts I nervously put out, telling a few close friends. The initial sales were modest, a trickle. The anxiety ratcheted up. Had I failed? Had all that struggle, all that sacrifice, been for nothing? Was Mom right all along? But I kept going. I ran the ads I could afford. I learned about keyword optimization. I reached out to book bloggers and online communities. I started building that platform, connecting with readers who were discovering the book. Slowly, miraculously, the trickle turned into a steady stream. Reviews started coming in, positive, enthusiastic. Readers connected with the story, the characters. They shared it. The algorithm, that mysterious force, started to take notice. The sales numbers started climbing. It was slow at first, then faster. I checked the dashboards obsessively, watching the graphs inch upwards. It was working. The alternative path, the one they didn't understand, the one I had built from scratch fueled by spite and desperation and fierce hope, was actually working. It was fast approaching Easter again. The cycle complete. Another family brunch loomed, the invitations already sent. The thought filled me with dread and anticipation in equal measure. Would I go? Could I face them? Knowing the book was out there, knowing it wasn't a roaring success yet, but no longer just a pipe dream? Or would I avoid the inevitable questions, the pitying glances, the subtle jabs? Then I got the email. From the platform. My eyes scanned the subject line, then the first sentence, then the whole message, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was about the book's performance, its ranking, its trajectory, and a notification about potential feature placement. A prominent one, very prominent, on the homepage, with the potential for national visibility depending on continued performance. Reading that email, sitting in my quiet apartment, the same apartment where I had cried on the floor just months ago, felt surreal. The numbers were staggering, far beyond anything I had dared to hope for. The reviews were glowing. The momentum was undeniable. The book wasn't just selling, it was connecting. It was reaching people. It was becoming something real. A cold, steady wave washed over me. It wasn't pure joy.
It was something more complex.
A deep, quiet satisfaction laced with the lingering bitterness of the journey. And a thought, sharp and precise, formed in my mind. Easter brunch. The feature placement was scheduled to go live the day before Easter. The announcement of its success, its ranking, its bestseller status on that platform would likely happen the day of or shortly after. I looked at the Easter invitation on my fridge. A calculated risk. A moment of pure, unadulterated, strategic timing. I accepted the invitation. My palms were sweating as I RSVP'd. This wasn't about confrontation, not in the traditional sense. It was about presence. About being there when the undeniable fact of my accomplishment arrived. It was about letting the numbers, the visibility, the objective truth speak for itself. Easter morning arrived, bright and sunny, just like the year before. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident, capable, not defiant, just present. I drove to my parents' house, the familiar route feeling foreign and charged with anticipation. The pit in my stomach was back, but it felt different this time. Less like fear, more like readiness. The house was already buzzing when I arrived. The familiar smells of roasting meat and floral arrangements. The sound of overlapping conversations. Everyone was there. Cousins, aunts, uncles. Mom greeted me with a practiced smile, a polite kiss on the cheek. Her eyes, though, held that familiar, assessing gaze. I saw her glance at my hands, perhaps looking for an engagement ring, another form of acceptable accomplishment, then quickly away. She didn't ask about my writing, she didn't ask about my job. Just a polite, generic, "How have you been, dear?" I smiled. "I've been very busy, actually," I said, keeping my tone light, neutral. "Things have been moving very fast." She nodded vaguely, already turning to greet another arriving guest. I mingled, making small talk, navigating the familiar terrain of family dynamics. The conversations drifted, as they always did, to achievements. My cousin Mark was talking about his intense residency hours. My cousin Sarah was discussing a complex case. The air was thick with the unspoken competition, the quiet flexing of societal success. I sat down at the dining table when called, taking the same seat as last year. The sunlight streamed in the window, illuminating the same dancing dust motes. The scent of lilies felt less suffocating today, more just present. My plate was filled with the traditional fare. I ate slowly, deliberately, participating in the surface-level conversation, my mind buzzing beneath. The television was on in the living room, a large screen visible from the dining room, muted, showing a national morning news program. It was usually on during these gatherings, a harmless background flicker. The conversation at the table turned, inevitably, towards the future. Plans, goals, aspirations. My aunt was asking my cousin David about his next big project. My mother interjected, her voice clear, directing the conversation, guiding it towards the safe, familiar harbor of conventional success. She looked around the table, smiling, acknowledging the accomplishments already discussed. Her gaze swept over me, a brief pause, a familiar tightening around her eyes. I could feel the preamble forming, the polite lead-in that would inevitably conclude with another observation about my life compared to everyone else's. The air grew stiller, expectant. This was it. The moment I had been dreading and planning for a year. She opened her mouth, ready to deliver her pronouncement, her gaze fixed on me, perhaps ready with a slightly kinder, but equally dismissive, version of last year's words. And then it happened. On the television screen in the living room, cutting through the muted background noise, a graphic appeared. Bright, bold. It was an advertisement for the online platform where my book was published. And then the segment began. The morning show hosts, cheerful and energetic, were talking about trends, online trends, and specifically about breakout successes on their featured platform. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The feature placement. The host began listing top-performing titles. They showed covers on the screen. One by one, my heart hammered against my ribs. The first few weren't mine. My hands clenched under the table. Doubt, that old serpent, reared its head. What if it didn't happen? What if the momentum had stalled? What if I had miscalculated? My mother was still looking at me, her mouth slightly open, ready to speak. The rest of the family was watching her, waiting for her pronouncement. The room felt suspended in time. Then, the host's voice, clear and amplified slightly as someone in the living room must have nudged the volume up slightly, announced, "And our biggest breakout success story this month, rocketing to the top of the charts across multiple genres, is a novel that's captured the imagination of readers everywhere. A truly stunning debut." On the screen, large and unmistakable, appeared my book cover. The title, the author name, my name, displayed prominently. The host continued, listing accolades, describing the plot in glowing terms, mentioning the unprecedented speed with which it had climbed the ranks. They used words like phenomenon, must-read, bestseller. "It's currently the #1 book on the platform," the host announced with a flourish, and projected to stay there. Silence fell over the dining room. Absolute, stunned silence. Forks clattered softly onto plates as hands froze. Every head turned away from my mother, away from me, towards the glowing screen in the living room. I didn't look at the screen. My eyes were fixed on my mother's face. The color drained from it, slowly at first, then rapidly, leaving her skin a pale, pasty white. The practiced smile vanished, replaced by an expression of utter shock, disbelief, and something else, dawning horror. Her eyes, moments before sharp with judgment, were wide and unblinking, fixed on the television screen as if it were broadcasting an alien invasion. Her mouth, which had been about to deliver its familiar judgment, remained slightly open, frozen in mid-syllable. The rest of the family's reactions unfolded around her like dominoes falling in slow motion. My Aunt Carol gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My cousin Mark, mid-sentence about hospital rotations, trailed off, his jaw slacked. Sarah, the lawyer, looked utterly bewildered. Uncle Bill choked slightly on his ham. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the cheerful voice of the television host talking about my book, my bestseller, the accomplishment that was, by their own definition, undeniably real and incredibly tangible. It wasn't just a win. It was a public, undeniable vindication delivered on a national stage, broadcast directly into the heart of the gathering where my worth had been questioned the year before. It wasn't luck. It was the culmination of a year of relentless work, fueled by the very words that had tried to diminish me. I had aimed for undeniable. I had aimed for visible. I had aimed for something that would make them freeze. And I had hit the bullseye. I sat there, quiet. I didn't jump up and down. I didn't shout, "See? I told you so." That wasn't my style. That wasn't the point. The point was the quiet, internal knowledge. The point was watching the tableau of shocked faces, the silence that spoke louder than any words. My mother remained frozen, her eyes still wide, her face a mask of disbelief. The cheerful voices from the television continued for a few more seconds, listing reader reviews, praising the narrative. Then the segment ended, the screen showing a generic news graphic. The silence in the dining room stretched, thick and heavy. Slowly, heads began to turn back towards the table.
Towards me.
The expressions were a mix of shock, confusion, forced smiles, and something that looked a lot like grudging respect. My Aunt Carol was the first to break the silence, her voice hushed, almost reverent. Is that? My cousin Mark recovered slightly, stammering. Your book? Number one?
On.
On the platform? I looked at them, a small, quiet smile forming on my lips. It didn't reach my eyes. My eyes felt cold, observing. Yes, I said, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos of my internal world. It is. My mother finally stirred. She blinked, as if waking from a trance. She cleared her throat, a dry, rasping sound. She tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. Well, she managed finally, her voice thin and strained, not the confident matriarch's voice from earlier. Well, isn't that surprising? Surprising. The understatement of the year. It wasn't surprising to me. It was the result of everything that had happened since her words had sliced through the air last Easter. It was born from her disappointment, nurtured by my struggle, and brought to fruition by a cold, unyielding determination she had inadvertently ignited. The rest of the brunch was surreal. The atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The conversation about accomplishments felt awkward, strained. My cousins, moments ago so confident in their conventional successes, seemed unsure how to react. They offered congratulations, but they felt stilted, forced. They asked questions about the book, about the process, but there was an undercurrent of bewilderment. This wasn't the path they understood. This kind of success, achieved outside the traditional structures they revered, seemed to baffle them. My mother was quiet for the remainder of the meal. She didn't meet my eyes directly. When she did speak to me, her voice was overly polite, hesitant. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable deference. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. She could no longer single me out as the one exception, the one failure. The world, broadcast on national television, had declared otherwise. Leaving that day felt different from leaving the year before. There was no urgent need to escape, no crushing weight of shame. There was just quiet satisfaction. The vindication was potent, sweeter than any dessert. But it was also bittersweet. The pain of the past year, the struggle, the isolation, didn't magically disappear. The relationship with my mother was changed, perhaps permanently. The words she spoke had ignited a fire, yes, but they had also left scars. Driving home, the setting sun painted the sky again, but this time the colors felt victorious, triumphant. I had faced the dragon, the fear of failure, the need for validation, the weight of family expectations, and emerged victorious, not by their rules, but by my own. The book's success grew beyond that initial feature. It stayed on the bestseller lists, opened doors to other opportunities, secured foreign rights deals, even sparked interest from Hollywood. It was bigger than I had ever dreamed. And it all started with those 6 words spoken on a sunny Easter afternoon. The accomplishment they craved, the tangible, visible success had arrived. But the journey to get there had taught me that my worth wasn't measured by their metrics, or even by bestseller lists. It was in the resilience forged in the fire of their doubt, in the quiet determination to keep writing even when I felt worthless, in the courage to build my own path. My relationship with my mother remains complex. There's a new respect there, maybe even a touch of awe. But the easy warmth, the unquestioning bond one had once longed for, is gone, replaced by a wary understanding. She saw me as a failure, and in doing so, she pushed me to achieve something far greater than I might have otherwise. It's a strange, complicated legacy. The pain was real, the struggle was immense, but the triumph, hard-earned and undeniably my own, was colossal. And sometimes, the most beautiful things grow from the most barren ground, watered by tears and fueled by fire. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.